Matt Frei on LBC. Listen on your smart speaker now. Just say, play LBC.
We've been missing him for a few weeks. I don't know where he went. Was it a witness protection program? Was it a long holiday in the Caribbean? No, it wasn't. He was doing LBC shows. But now he's back in Washington, sitting in front of the White House. It looks remarkably diminished, Simon. But of course, not if you talk to the guy who lives there, or actually probably spending his weekend in Florida. What's going on in the head of Donald Trump regarding the war in Iran? Let's start with that.
Well, I mean, the most extraordinary aspect of all of this, Matt, and where I think we are now stuck, is that because of Donald Trump's determination always to provide a running commentary on social media about negotiations that are taking place, because of his determination always to try and be the first person to announce success in those negotiations so that the credit all accrues to him and certainly doesn't go to anybody else, he's undercutting the negotiations. So the various completely contradictory messages that he put out yesterday on social media, hailing the fact that the Iranians were saying the Strait of Hormuz was open, but saying no, but the US naval blockade is still in force and won't be lifted until there's a final peace agreement. Now, of course, the Iranians taking full advantage of that and saying, well, if the blockade is still in force, we're absolutely not reopening the Strait of Hormuz. He can't, as you have observed on so many occasions, Donald Trump's greatest enemy is Donald Trump. He cannot save himself from himself. And the idea that, you know, you're J.D. Vance waiting for the possibility of returning to Islamabad for more face-to-face talks with the Iranians that on paper ought to resolve this conflict, but you've got to keep one eye open 24 hours a day to looking at the president's social media feed is just staggering immaturity and, frankly, lunacy at the end of a couple of weeks in which the president's mental state has moved to the front pages here as an issue.
As I've also said in the past, and I think you have done too, you can take the man out of reality television. You cannot take reality television and its ratings desire, need out of the man. So, okay, he's confused, he changes his mind, he does all his negotiations in public on social media. The Iranians are responding in kind to all this. I mean, who are the people who matter, who now think that Trump has lost the plot and actually can do something about it?
Well, there are a prominent number of MAGA influencers who over the last 2 weeks have bailed on him, and they include former Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, you can argue that she's been considered a traitor by the White House for quite a while. She's certainly positioning herself as the authentic leader of MAGA, the successor to Donald Trump. She says he's gone insane. Literally, that's the word she uses. She questions his sanity. But then you've got people that were still very much on the inside, even just 3 or 4 weeks ago. Tucker Carlson, the former Fox News presenter, who has suggested that people inside the White House need to get their hands on the nuclear football, make sure they've got the codes, if necessary, to stop Donald Trump from engaging in first strike use with a nuclear weapon. Megyn Kelly, the former Fox News presenter, who has been lined up solidly in the Trump camp for several years now, saying that she is sick to death of his behaviour. Can't he act like a normal human? She asked her audience rhetorically a few days ago. So those figures are bailing on him. Whether that translates into a significant loss of support within his Make America Great Again grassroots is a slightly different question. But many of those people showing up for his Arizona speech at the Charlie Kirk organization's event yesterday were noting to reporters that they had paid $4.98 a gallon for petrol to get there. That is unsustainable.
And to what extent is that unsustainable rise in the price of gas, as they say in America, and the unpopularity of it feeding through to congressmen and women who are seeking re-election in November?
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's no question that that is feeding through. It's even feeding through to Donald Trump's own treasury, which has done a complete U-turn over the last...
Are they prepared to pick a fight with the boss in public? No.
Well, in public, they are prepared to pick a fight increasingly, I think. I mean, obviously he's got Republican hawks completely lined up behind him, but they are disappointed in the fact that Donald Trump appears to be about to strike a deal with the Iranian regime, describing them as much more reasonable than the older members of the regime, some of whom, only some, have been eliminated during the course of the war. But we have seen more of a willingness by Republicans to challenge President Trump's right to be pursuing this war, to fund it. He wants $200 billion from Congress to fund ongoing operations in the Middle East, particularly, of course, targeting Iran. And there is growing evidence that lawmakers on Capitol Hill are not going to give him that. Indeed, the administration only won in the House of Representatives by a single solitary vote earlier this week, heading off a challenge to his right to continue prosecuting this war in Iran without consulting Congress. That's a real message for the White House.
J.D. Vance. I'm fascinated by J.D. Vance with his eyeliner, the Catholic convert who picked a fight with the Pope over the just war. The whole theory of just war was written by St. Augustine, and that still underpins the laws of war. And it so happens that Pope Leo is an Augustinian. So, I mean, he's picked the fight with the wrong person, hasn't he? With the wrong Pope.
Yeah, and this is J.D. Vance, who, of course, was only able, as a result of his visit to Hungary, to make Viktor Orban's loss in the Hungarian election a deeper loss. Orban lost support in the days after J.D. Vance's direct interference in the Hungarian election a few days ago. Now he has the gall to make speeches and give interviews in which he tells the Pope to stop sticking his nose in America's affairs. What has the Pope said? He has said that he doesn't agree with either the war on Iran, he doesn't see a legal justification for it, and he didn't agree with the attack on Venezuela, for which there is no legal justification. The administration never provided one. He's also, of course, opposed to the ongoing and still brutal efforts by this administration to enforce its mass deportation policies. The notion that J.D. Vance, who, by the way, is literally about to publish his second memoir, which is all about his recent, note the word recent, conversion to Catholicism, that J.D. Vance is lecturing the Pope and telling him, you need to be very careful when you speak about matters of theology.
I know.
It beggars belief.
It beggars belief. Has he completely ruined his own prospects of becoming the nominee of the Republican Party in the next presidential election, should there be one?
I mean, not yet. There are clearly two front-runner candidates, and they are J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But there is absolutely no question that J.D. Vance has had a very tough time. The Hungary visit was a catastrophe, redolent as it was of the kind of interference that we will see from the U.S. government in the next British general election. I mean, if they were endorsing Orban, and Trump was literally trying to bribe Hungarian voters into voting for Orban, promising them that if they did, he would be flush with cash towards Hungary and help advance the country's path to prosperity.
It worked in Argentina, but it didn't work in Hungary.
Right, but they'll try it again in the UK and in every other country in Europe where these elections come up, because they want candidates of the right and the far right to triumph. So the idea that Vance was rebuffed by Hungarian voters, the idea that he couldn't seal the deal with the Iranians in Islamabad, partly because of Donald Trump's social media feed, but also partly because the Iranians sent 4 PhDs into those negotiations in Islamabad. The Americans sent a fairly inexperienced vice president of the United States, a real estate mogul in the form of Steve Witkoff, the president's old mucker, and the president's own son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who is compromised because he's also trying to strike business deals all over the Middle East. So currency in J.D. Vance is at a low ebb. Marco Rubio will be quite happy about that. But for both men, you've got to ask yourself, what kind of chalice will you be inheriting if you take over the mantle of this party by the time this is all over?
So the only regime change that America has managed to effect in the last 2 months has been in Hungary. It's the exact opposite of what they tried to do. So finally, do you think that given Trump's crazy comments, the war of choice that seems to be going, not his way, the fact that it's all about the Strait of Hormuz, which was open on the 27th of February and then closed since then, do you think we've hit peak Trump?
I think we have hit peak Trump so far. The problem with peak Trump is that we never reach the final peak, right? I mean, there is never a floor. So you're just constantly going from one jaw-dropping series of developments to the next. I think the biggest issue about all of this, Matt, is to buy into what Donald Trump is selling about Iran, you have to embrace complete falsehoods. There's not a scintilla of truth in what he's saying. You've got to buy that they were 2 weeks away from having a nuclear weapon that could attack America when they weren't. And now you've got to buy that there has been regime change when there hasn't been. There are no facts driving this process here.
There is one fact, though, and that is that this show is now over. Simon Marks, thank you very much indeed for your time in Washington, as ever. Hope to speak to you again next week.